welcome. I think we're going to go ahead and dive in. And I'm just so excited to share some cool stuff with you today. So quick rundown on today's format. I've got 3 topics to cover. And then as always, we want to just open it up for live discussion. Any questions that you have or anything that's on your mind or that you'd like to contribute and share, we're all ears. And as always, open heart, open mind, nothing's off the table. We're totally transparent, happy to share anything that we know. So unless there's any initial questions, let's dive in. All right. First thing, so we're going to basically talk about today 2 things related to your actual keynote speech and 1 thing related to your business. In terms of the business, we're going to talk about pricing strategies, etc., and some things that we've uncovered recently. And then in terms of your keynote performance itself, we're going to talk about 2 things. One is around your crafting of a great keynote speech, sort of the format of a great keynote speech. And the second thing we're going to really dive into is talking about your own thought leadership pillars. All right. So with that in mind, just want to give you a little preview. Let's dive in. The first thing what I wanted to cover with you today is the best advice we can provide in terms of structuring a professional keynote speech. If you think about your keynote as a good, like a good book, there's going to be a clear beginning, middle, and an end. Think of it again as a 3-act play. And so here, after lots and lots of work and research and blah, 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 we've kind of narrowed our approach down to the following. I just wanted to share it with you. Feel free to use or not use it, by the way, but this has been working very effectively for us and many other speakers that we know and coach. Oh, hey, Eric. Nice to see you. Good, handsome face from Vancouver. Awesome. All right. So our 3-act play. In each of your 3 acts, you're going to have a couple core objectives. And I'll just walk you through each. Feel free to take any notes. But we're also going to send along a PDF that describes each of these things. So for your own knowledge and usage. Okay. Number 1, your opening. Your opening is going to be roughly 12 minutes, we'll call it. 12 to 15 minutes max. We'll just call it 12 for now. So just setting time for a second, opening, middle, and an end. Your opening is going to be about 8 minutes. Your middle is going to be about 40 minutes, give or take. And your ending is going to be about 8 minutes. So all in, we're sort of benchmarking today's discussion for a 60-minute keynote. Now, if it's 45, clearly you're going to compress that. If it's 90 minutes, you might expand it. But you get the idea. Beginning, middle, and an end, 12, 40, 8, plus or minus. Okay, so the opening, your core objectives are as follows. Number 1, to captivate and grab the audience's attention. And ideally, you're going to do that with a riveting story rather than just saying, hey, everybody, I'm happy to be here. You want to, in this core opening section, frame the problem that you are addressing. Too often, the amateur speaker comes out and starts talking about the solution way too quickly. Our recommendation is to start going really deep on the problem. In fact, exacerbating the problem to the point where now the audience is just feeling, please, please tell me the solution. So core objectives, captivate and grab the audience's attention. Frame the problem, make sure that the audience feels, and almost like they're getting pissed off that this problem exists, and they can't wait for you to help them solve it. You want to connect the dots to make sure that they feel that you are the right guide to help solve the problem, and also that solving the problem is accessible. It's within their reach. So if you're stating a problem that's so big, like you're going to cure disease, but the audience doesn't feel like they have any ability to do so, you will have lost the audience. So essentially, again, in the first opening minutes, you're going to want to capture their attention, frame the problem, connect the dots on why you're the right tour guide to help solve the problem, and making sure that they feel it is accessible. It's within their grasp, and you're about to show them how to do it. So at this point, you're opening. You haven't shared any of your wisdom or content, but now they're feeling bought into the situation. They care about the topic matter. They realize you're the right person to help them guide through the challenge, and they're ready to learn. So in the words of Simon Sinek, we haven't gotten into how. All we've really done is framed why. Any questions so far before we dive into the next section, the body or the main part of your keynote? Okay. One little hack that I'll give you just in terms of the opening. We've been playing with this a lot. Very often, keynote speakers will jump in very quickly on an opening, and they do what we generally call verbal throat clearing. It sounds like this. Oh, hey, everybody. It's so nice to be here. Wasn't the dinner buffet great? It's just such a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for our host, Jim, for having me today. Today, I'm going to talk about customer service. So all you've done right there, you've taken an amateur move. You've sort of cleared your throat and haven't given them anything to grab onto. A much slicker, more captivating, more professional approach. Remember this as the James Bond approach. If you ever go to a James Bond movie, the movie doesn't start like this. Oh, hello, my name is James Bond. I hope you saw Sean Connery in the previous version. We're going to have some fun today. We're going to talk about explosions. There's going to be a love scene. Are you kidding? You'd walk out. What the hell's going on? Instead, it goes like this. The curtains open of the movie, and all of a sudden, there's your hero. And he's like skiing down a mountain being chased by villains. And he's got his harpoon gun. And all of a sudden, the helicopter's coming, and people are jumping out, and there's explosions. And then after this incredibly captivating scene where your heart's pumping through your chest, then they roll the opening credits. What a beautiful metaphor for you as a speaker. So I would suggest that you take the stage with something dramatic. Don't even say hello. Just walk in and say something like this. The minute she looked up from her work, she knew she was in trouble. That's a good opening line, because now that's the beginning of a story. You want to hear more. Or you could open with a big provocative question. Think about your opening sequence just like the James Bond sequence. The first like 90 seconds to a minute and a half should be really engaging. Tell a great story. Grab your audience's heart and mind. Then after you finish the story, say, it's so great to be here. I just want to thank my host, Jim, for having me. What a wonderful group you are. Whatever you got to say in terms of your announcements. So start with the story, then get into your roll the credits equivalent. All right, back to our structure. The next part of your 3-act play, again, we started with the opening, now we're on the body. This is the bulk of your keynote. This is the 40 or so minutes out of 60 where you're going to be really sharing your wisdom. This is your methodology for why they're hiring you in the first place. And so here's the core objectives that I would suggest. First of all, people love numbered lists. Love them. So even if the title of your speech isn't the 5 great tools of leadership or the 3 keys to optimal health and wellness, this is a great place to frame your talk accordingly. So if you take, for example, that 40 minutes and you broke it into 5 things, just using 5 as an example, that would be 8 minutes per. So a good way to subdivide this body of your talk, let's say again, say it's 40 minutes, like I often will talk about the 5 core mindsets of innovation. Or maybe you're talking about the 6 things that you can do to flip adversity into achievement. This essentially is your model, your framework, and each of these then has their own little rhythm to it. Like if I'm talking about the 5 core mindsets of innovation, now each of these are about 8 minutes apiece. I'm going to, and inside each of them, I'm going to include a few different things. I'm going to include a description of what the hell the pillar is or the key is. I'm going to share some stories and examples of it in action. I might show an example of what it looks like if you fail to abide by this principle. I might share a tool or a technique or a takeaway, a little hack that the audience can take back and put into use in the months and years to come. I'm going to use a multimodal strategy, which we covered at boot camp, which is sharing stories that resonate, some with the head, some with the heart, some with the gut. So the point is, each of these little 8-minute segments, you might feel like, gosh, 40 minutes is a lot of time to fill, but they go really quick because really you've got 5, in this example, 8-minute little segments, which have to explain a concept, show some real world examples, perhaps give a technique or a tool, keep them entertained. Some are fun, some are funny, etc. And that's kind of how you might structure that 40 minutes. So Steve, if you're talking about the 5 things that you learned from being an astronaut, boom, that's great. You got 40 minutes there. You break it into 5 8-minute segments, and then you're going to share your wisdom accordingly. And so again, the whole point here is subdividing and having core objectives for each little spot throughout your keynote journey. And ideally, what I'd suggest that you do is, as you're making important points, reinforce them in a number of different ways so that they're hearing an example, maybe they're hearing a personal story of yours, maybe they're hearing an external example from a different industry. So the more ways that they can hear the same thing, the more they're going to really understand, embrace, and take away the core principles that you're sharing. So at the end of your body of your talk, that 40 minutes or so, the audience is going to feel pretty satiated. Like they just had an awesome meal. They're not going to feel necessarily like longing for more. They're going to feel good. Maybe it was so good they'd wish it was a few more minutes, but they're going to feel satisfied that you've delivered some real meaty value. Next up, our last segment of our 3-act play, your closing. Now, the core objectives that you have in your closing, number one, you want to bring it home with a bang, a big, strong, powerful ending. You want to make sure that you're going to summarize your core points, but ideally in the context of a story. And you're going to want to give them a specific next step, an actionable tool, not what to do for the rest of their lives, but what do they do Monday morning when they get back to their office? What I've learned is that if you give them, you kind of pass the baton back to the audience and give them a specific technique, that's enough to get their first step, which in turn, then they can figure out the subsequent steps thereafter. Now, a couple other thoughts before we round this out, and I just love to open it up for your perspective and questions. A great fireworks show, if you've ever been to see fireworks, has a bold, powerful opening and a finale at the end. Movies are the same, and your keynote should be the same also. So we talked about this James Bond-like opening. The closing should have the same power. You don't want to end by saying, yeah, that's all the time I have. Any questions? You want to end in that same James Bond powerful finale type of way, and the only way to end a speech is the word thank you. Boom. That's it. You ended strong, brought them home. Ideally, they're getting chills down their spine so they can leap to their feet with appreciation and applause. The other thing that I would say is that if you're going to summarize your core points, the amateur way to do that is to say, before I conclude, I'd like to summarize my 5 points. Here's the little trick that I do all the time, and I would encourage you to embrace. Tell a killer story that embraces all 5 of your techniques. And so if you're talking about if Eric's talking about the future of work, for example, he's going to tell this great story. But essentially what you might do is pause in the middle of it. So in other words, you tell the build up to the story, and then it's almost like a word from our commercial sponsor, but the word is from Eric in this example, rephrasing his 5 points, and then you hear the rest of the story. So I'm going to do a hack job because I don't speak on your topic, Eric, but it might sound like something like this. The folks at let's pick a company. The folks at Target were facing a giant problem. Despite their leadership in retail, sales have been plummeting, and they're continuing to get outpunched by Amazon. In fact, the company was in a massive concern, and employees were running for the hills. In fact, attracting and retaining employees became such a challenge that there are times that Target had to shrink the hours of a store, thereby losing tons of dollars in revenue, disappointing investors, and deeply hurting their brand. The problem became so bad, they didn't even know what to do, and their heads were spinning with despair, about to lose this delicious brand that they spent 5 decades building. I'm just making this up to be clear, so don't check the facts. But all I've done so far is talked about the problem, the world of hurt that Target was in. So now if I'm Eric telling this story, I might then do this. And they searched around high and low, and then what did they do? They finally came to the 5 pillars that represent the future of work. Number 1, and Eric would then recap, tell his point. Number 2, they did this. Number 3, they did that. So now he's reframing his 5 pillars in the context of this dramatic story about Target, instead of him just, as a professor might do, summarize his core points. Then in this example, he told the first half of the story, which is the problem. Then right at the middle of it, he stops and explains his 5 points. Then he goes back to the story and says, and wow, did that make a difference? The folks at Target now all of a sudden got that bounce back in their step. Morale increased, recruiting engine fired back up, and now they had so much talent performing at such a high level. Just last month, they closed the highest revenue in the company's history. The stock is appreciated, shareholders are delighted, and the CEO just got a massive bonus. Again, it wasn't the greatest story, so I apologize for that. But I started with this deep problem, took them down this valley of despair. Right at the minute before the tables turned, I paused, talked about, in this example, how Eric's teachings, his 5 messages, really resonated and changed the direction of their story. Then you tell the wonderful happy ending and everybody is good. So what you've done in this case is you summarized your key points, but in the context of a really dramatic story. That's a pro way to do it, as opposed to a professor would just respond. Cool. So anyway, real quick recap, and then I'd love to hear your questions, resonates, anything that resonates, your disagreements, etc. But as we talk about keynote structure, think about this: beginning, middle, and an end. Beginning is about 15% or so of the duration of the talk. You're capturing their attention, you're framing the problem, you're getting them bought in, you're making it feel accessible. The middle, the body of your talk, is about your core teachings, ideally subdivided into a numerical list. The 3 keys to happiness, the 5 keys to optimal wellness, the 6 danger traps of conflict, whatever your multiple list is. And we'll get into that next here today. And then finally, you're going to round out strong. Bring it on home with a killer story that embodies all of your key teachings. Pass the baton back to the audience, give them something to do, and then end that baby with passion and fury, like a Baptist preacher would end the talk. And so his entire flock leaps to their feet, and they feel salvation. All right, with that, what can I answer for you? How does that sit with you? What questions do you have?
That's good.
Hey, Josh, it's Steve. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, brother.
Yeah, greetings from Silicon Valley. First of all, I want to let you know that since I took the boot camp about a year and a half ago, I've either attended these or watched every single one you've recorded, and I just can't tell you how grateful I am to get the boost of advice and your energy every month. So I'm sure everyone else feels the same way. So thank you.
Thank you.
On your closing, I heard you use the word baton about a year ago, and I'm telling you, when I use that in audiences, I can tell that, wow, he's actually giving me something to walk out the door. So I wanted to thank you for that word. I hope you don't mind I use it. A question on the middle. So you stressed in our training to try not be talking on 15 different topics, to really try and be an expert on, one thing. For me, I couldn't quite do that. So I actually do talk about 2 or 3 things depending on the customer. They always want to hear about, personal motivation, self-development, etc. And I talk about my story and stories of other people I've had. And then they'll want to hear about teamwork, or, making the impossible possible, whatever it is. So usually I have 2 and sometimes 3 topics in the middle part. And it seems to me that the strategy you've given us still works. It's a little bit dangerous kind of going off more than one topic. You can still kind of divide it up. Did you have any thoughts about maybe different things we might want to think about if we actually are covering 2 topics, for example? Thank you.
Yes. And Steve, as you know, I'm probably your biggest fan other than your family. And I would say this with deep love and respect. I would try to somehow weave them together. And so the audience feels like there's one topic. So if you poll people 6 weeks later, they would say, oh, Steve talked about teamwork or overcoming adversity, whatever that one topic is. So I would try to take the topics that, now you can, in your mind, think about them as different things, but try to cascade them into one overall theme. So if your overall theme was how to do the impossible, maybe one pillar of that is teamwork. Another pillar of that is the thing. It could be communication or whatever. But ideally, people are walking away feeling that they got they saw one movie, not 3 movies, 3 short stories stitched together. Now, the good news there is that if you have multiple topics that you speak on, maybe they're going to hire you next year to give topic number 2, or the year after that to give topic number 3. But it's just not as deeply rewarding or easy for the audience to take back and put into action if they feel like there's totally separated talks. Now, by the way, your 3 points could be 5 things that I learned as an astronaut that drive great leadership performance. That's awesome. But again, I just want them to walk away feeling that there was an umbrella topic that was weaved together with these subset pillars.
That's awesome advice. Thank you, Josh. I think, a lot of times we think of things, but we don't act on them, or we don't put them together. And I really appreciate what you just said, because I've had kind of the similar thoughts, but now I get a much better idea of how to do it. Thank you.
No problem. Other questions or thoughts before we continue?
Josh, I have a quick question for you. Do you have any kind of transition statement at the end of Act 2 before you go into Act 3? I'm sure you don't say something based on what you said earlier, like, let me leave you with one final story, because that's more amateur professor kind of speaking. Or do you in fact do that?
I think there's a lot of different ways to get there. What I do in each of my pillars is I actually start with the name of the pillar and end with the name of the pillar. So, and I literally call it out. So I'll give you an example, John. So one example would be, core mindset number 2, video killed the radio star. This, by the way, is actually one of my pillars. And I talk about, make a joke, it was the 1979 song and first song ever played on MTV and such. And then I describe what it means for the audience, which is to let go of the past in favor of the possible and to defy traditions and challenge assumptions. So I will just first define the point. Then I'll tell a bunch of examples and stories of it, maybe give them a tool. And then at the end, I'll say, and once again, our second core point, video killed the radio star. So what I try to do is bookend each of these pillars with the description and the name of it, so that repetition really sinks in. So if I was at the 5th one, and I'd say, let's say video killed the radio star was number 5, I'd say, all right, that was point number 5, video killed the radio star. My transition after that into Act 3 might be something as simple as saying this. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I hope that you've received some real value. But before we wrap things up, I'd like to bring it all home for you, if I may, with one final story that embodies all 5 of these core principles. So the nice thing about that is that you're giving them a little marker. Like, hey, we've covered, it's almost, you're not like saying, hey, time for Act 3, but you're sort of giving them the guidance, like, okay, we're kind of rounding third base here. We're about to come on home. I'm going to bring it home for you. And then now we're like, okay, you're going to tell me a story that brings all these points together. I can't wait to hear it. if you didn't want to do that, you could just go right into the story. That would work also.
Hey, Josh. I don't have much of a voice. I actually have a question for Steve, of all people. You just said you're Steve's biggest fan, and I'm sitting here Googling Steve. I'm just wondering whether I could steal this networking opportunity as a Supercub pilot and connect with Steve. Because I just Googled you, Steve, and you are super cool. Is that possible to connect with Steve somehow?
Of course it is, and I see the airplane behind you, so I think we have similar interests. Yeah, I'll share it through Matter well, actually, my website's astronautstevesmith.com, and there's a red button. Thanks.
Awesome. I'll touch base. Thanks, Steve.
You'll love Ryan, Steve. He's also a pilot and an amazing and extraordinarily accomplished guy. All right, so cool. So in the interest of time, that was our structure. Next, I wanted to dive in, if I may, into that body. So the body of our talk, and this, Steve, may help answer your question in a little more detail. I wanted to prepare some, to share some ideas on how you might structure the body of your talk in more detail. So each of us, first of all, if you zoom out for a second, you're probably hopefully talking about a core message. And so maybe your core message is the danger traps of traditional leadership, or maybe it's how to be healthy. So if you have a core message, my suggestion is break it down into a numbered list. And so one of our guests who's not on today, he's been to our boot camp several times, has the 5 keys to optimal wellness and performance. I kind of like that. And by the way, just hearing that, don't you want to know what they are? I mean, just the mere fact that there's a numbered list makes you deliciously, like, I want to know what that is. What do you mean? Tell me more. But so in his case, then he breaks it down. So these are the 5 keys of optimal wellness. Or maybe you have the 6 danger traps to avoid of interpersonal communication. Or maybe you talk about the 5 core mindsets of innovators. But a numbered list really works. And just a couple thoughts for you on how you develop your own numbered list. First suggestion is, and Steve, this may help kind of in your earlier question, is think about this. What's the one transformation that you're going to create for that audience? If you had to just choose one, what's one thing? What's the single transformation that if they show up at 10 a.m., you take the stage, 11 a.m., you walk off to a standing ovation, like how are they different? What's the transformation that you create? And then what you want to do, step number 2, is say, okay, what would the step-by-step approach look like if you were giving a person advice on how to make that transformation? So if the transformation that you wanted to create is have optimal health and wellness, the 5 steps that Tom has are get your mind in order, basically, and he's got all kinds of tricks for that. Nail your nutrition, make sure that you have exercise and movement, build some accountability, control your environment so you're not having Twinkies all over and snacking on them. So those are his 5. Of course, you're going to have your own, but the question you got to ask yourself is, do the 5 core points solve the problem or help the audience achieve the transformation that you've set forth? In my case, if I'm talking about how to be more innovative and I share the 5 core mindsets of innovation, yeah, that kind of works. If you're talking about how to be more effective in sales and you say, this is the 3 habits of highly effective salespeople, great, that sort of resonates. It makes sense. So just make sure that you're laying out a format or a framework that you can use to answer the question that they're having and to create the transformation that you seek. By the way, once you have this, it goes way further than your keynote. You could write a book with 5 chapters or 7 chapters or whatever. This could be a framework that's a PDF download that you summarize. You could have an ongoing blog series or a podcast that takes one of them at a time. So this framework, I've seen people use a certain framework for like a decade or more. There's a wonderfully successful author who created a single book, I believe, called Crucial Conversations. And her framework has now been taught thousands of times around the world, dozens of keynotes. I mean, that's it, her framework. A friend of mine is an innovation guy, and he's got like a similar framework that he uses again and again. So the content will change. The stories might change. You're going to update with more relevant stuff. But if you have a framework, that framework can last for quite some time. So if Ryan is talking about how do you dig yourself out of a really tough spot and ultimately soar as a result of that adversity, he might have a framework, the 5 steps to overcoming adversity. And that framework, again, he'll change his stories throughout the years or whatever, but that framework can be something that he can really lean on, at least until his next book or his next total rewrite. So my suggestion for you is, again, come up with a numbered list that best is a step-by-step process to articulate the challenge that you're helping people solve and for them to achieve the transformation that they seek. We also have a PDF on this. We'll send it around afterward. But just with that in mind, any questions that I could answer for you? It sounds kind of straightforward, but again, just experience shows there's such a power of it. The other nice thing is that the audience can follow along. We found that in keynotes, if it's just like the 60-minute ramble, it's kind of tough. Like, where am I? I'm halfway through. Like, the audience doesn't really know where they are. And the audience is generally like markers. Just like when you're reading a book, you like to know, okay, now I'm chapter 12. So knowing that, okay, we just finished point number 2, we're about to enter point number 3, those little markers are very helpful for an audience and even allows them to think about how they take notes. Those markers are essentially the Roman numerals that they're going to have when they take notes. And so if you're doing your job well as a keynote speaker and you were to go steal the notes of 100 people from the audience, their Roman numeral set all says the same thing. That's how you know you've won as a keynote speaker. Questions, thoughts, complaints?
Hey, Josh, it's Sarah.
Hello, Sarah. How you doing?
Great. How are you today?
Awesome.
Great. So question for you, and you've given me one or two along the way, but who do you study that uses these methods well? Like preachers, comedians? Like, is there anyone that, as we're trying to soak in inspiration and just kind of model these kind of frameworks, like, is there anyone that does it well?
You know, excellent question. I think there's all the people that you mentioned are great to study for different reasons. Comedians are great at delivery and what they're doing with the stage. Baptist preachers are amazing what they do with their voice. So I think that the more that we study and borrow inspiration from anybody who's ever in front of a microphone, awesome, and I highly encourage it. In terms of structure like that, funny enough, college professors tend to do that pretty well. Now, college professors do a lot of things terribly, so don't become a college professor because they tend to be overly wordy and academic and they lose their audience and everything else. But in terms of structure specifically, they tend to do a pretty darn good job with that, or anyone who's like sort of in instructional design. So my suggestion would be, if you can capture what's good about a college professor, sort of the format and the flow, but then bring the energy of a comedian and the soul of a Baptist preacher, you meld those things together, that's where the magic happens.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Well, let's continue on and talk about pricing. And then as we conclude this last segment here, we'll have plenty of time for additional Q&A or random thoughts. I continue to get asked, one of the questions I get asked most often is, what's the most effective way to set your price? And so I thought I'd share, we've been refining our thinking, even Steve, since you joined, you said about a year and a half ago. We've been refining our thinking on this and have now come up with a pretty prescriptive approach that I'd love to share with you. Here's what I recommend that you do. If everyone remembers back to their player card, when you were at boot camp, as you probably remember, we identified 8 core attributes that are essentially the great equalizers. These are the attributes that are going to objectively drive fee and volume. And those attributes include your stage skills, it includes your marketing polish, it includes how much value you bring to the equation, it includes the impact that you leave, it includes your notoriety and your fame and your platform. So again, I won't repeat those all now, but there are 8 core attributes that will specifically drive your ability to hit fee and volume in your speaking business. With that in mind, here's my suggestion. Step 1, score yourself. So take a blank player card. If you need one, just let us know, we'll email you one. And objectively score yourself. Before giving yourself an extra pat on the back or trying to be too hard on yourself to be self-deprecating, just be honest about it. Give yourself an honest score. If you're great on stage, say it. If you stink at marketing, say it. But just be objective about it. And to validate your own objectivity, my suggestion is to get a handful of others to score you as well. So like here in my office, I might have Jordan or Connor or Matt give us a score. You may have friends that you met here at the Ring Circus give you a score. And so the idea is to get a handful of people that you know and trust, all scoring you, and then you can sort of, the gravity will show. Like you'll kind of see where you actually fall on this score, and then add it up and see where you're at. Okay? So step number 1, give yourself an honest assessment, both internally and from those that you trust, on where you sit. Step number 2, identify the topic area that you speak on and identify 5 to 10 similar speakers. So if you speak on the future of work and your fee is $15K, you would identify 5 to 10 other people that speak on the future of work at that same price point. You look at a couple like 15 or 20, but somewhere in that range. So step 1, score yourself honestly. Step 2, now you're going to score using the exact same mechanism, score 5 to 10 direct competitors. So I speak on innovation, my fee range is $35K. So I would, again, take people who speak on innovation or creativity or, something pretty close to that, startup thinking, and find other people in my fee range, and I'll score myself and objectively score them as well. Step number 3, lay it all out on the table and see kind of how you stack up to others at your desired fee range. And here's the magic. I'm going to say this twice so you really get it. Set your fee where you're going to win 70% of the time. I'll say it again. Set your fee where you honestly believe that you can win 70% of the time. So if you speak on leadership in the broadest sense and your fee is $20K and you're comparing yourself to 10 other people that speak on leadership at $20K and that's where you want to set your fee, make sure that you feel like you could actually win 70% of the time. If not, you're setting your fee too high. If you feel like you're going to win 100% of the time, you're setting your fee too low. So here's the magic with this number 70. Let's say a bureau pitches you 10 times. If they win 7 out of the 10, they're like, wow, Glenn is awesome. Jeff Ponders is rocking. Steve Smith is the best. John Livesey's got all this momentum, and they'll keep recommending you again and again. If you, on the other hand, only win 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10, they say to themselves, yeah, the market's not really buying the speaker. I'm just going to stop recommending him or her. So what happens is, and that, by the way, happens in the market in general, because the market has like this sort of highly visible momentum of its own. If you're getting booked again and again and again at your fee range, you create volume, and then you're in front of a bunch of other people who then want you to speak more. So what happens is that the volume will help you increase your fee later on. So instead of setting your fee as so high that you only win 3 out of 10 or 4 out of 10, set it so you're winning 7 out of 10. Here's what it does. It sends the message to the marketplace that you are hot, you're on fire, you're in high demand, everyone wants you on their stage. Then what does that do? It creates more opportunities for you to be on stage, thereby driving revenue. Then every time you speak, you get an opportunity to plant a bunch of seeds so that hundreds or thousands of people in the audience hear you speak, and then they're going to call up their favorite bureau and ask you for you by name, or they'll reach out to you directly. It sends a message to other speakers that this person's out there, and when they look at agendas, they're like, oh, Steve Smith's everywhere. Everywhere I go, I see him on an agenda. And you build real momentum in your speaking business. People start talking about you. They know you're rocking at that fee, and then you go from 15 to 20. And then you go from 20 to 22.5, and then 22.5 to 25. So as a mechanism to increase fee over time, score yourself, score your competitors, set the fee where you think you can win 70% of the time. And then if and only if you feel you're ready to win at 70% at the next fee jump up with that competitive set, then raise your fee. I know it sounds rather programmatic, and it may even sound a little formulaic, but I'm telling you, it just works. And here's where I've seen people fall down. Let's just say you were on Good Morning America, and you're like, gosh, everyone's talking about me, my phone's ringing off the hook. How about I'll just triple my fee? Honestly, you might be able to get it for a couple months, but what's going to happen is, let's say you went from 15 to 50. After the sex appeal of that period wears off a year from now, and then you honestly compare yourself to others at $50,000 fee range, are you really going to win 70% of the time? So my suggestion with great respect is, don't get tricked into raising your fee too high just because you're the flavor of the week. I would much rather you see the long-term play, which is set your fee where you're in high demand, always stay in high demand, never retreat or go backwards, and you just keep inching your fee up as the market allows and as you create additional demand. So that's our pricing structure that's been working for us for years. As I've studied others, that's exactly what they do. That's what Peter Sheehan does, and Sally Hogshead and Mel Robbins and others. Highly recommend that you do the same. With that in mind, make sense? What questions can I answer for you?
Well, hey, Josh, this is Mike. First of all, you're always awesome, man. So it's nice to touch base again and hear you again. I mostly do a ton of speaking with builders, and mostly it's pitching our company. And so I've really been trying to kind of buckle down and create some things here. So part of this is trying to build topics. So I'm sorry if it's a little off of where you're at, but are you better going industry specific on topics where I know that truly I'd be a big fish in a very small pond of people that talk on that? Or are you better going very broad where there's more people that do that? Like would I be better doing a sales angle where there's lots of people that talk about that? Or am I better talking about like new construction sales, which is very thin and there's nobody doing it, but there's probably less demand for that particular thing?
Yeah, so good question. It totally depends on what your personal objectives are, and there's no right or wrong answers. So Mike, if your objective was, hey, I want to speak 50 times a year at $20K a piece and have $1 million a year speaking business, then I would say go more broad, because there's a lot more people wanting to hire a sales expert than there are construction companies wanting to hire a new unit sales expert. So you'd want to take a broader approach that would be more appealing, because if you only talk about new construction sales, someone from a healthcare company or a financial services company, it's not going to work. Now, if your core objective isn't so much to capture fee and drive your speaking business, but as an entree to get into the door and to drive your core business, marketplace homes, then I would probably take a more specific and industry approach, because you're really not trying to capture fees. Not that fees are bad, but you're trying to go more to drive the back end of promoting your business. Then you might take a more narrow approach. So for the folks on the line, as in many cases, there's no right or wrong answer to this question or many other questions. A lot of it has to do with your own personal objectives.
Makes sense.
Cool.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Josh, for me, obviously, we just launched everything not that long ago. So Michael and everyone, we're all pushing that. When you say 70% win, in regards to holds, what percentage of holds are you turning into gigs? Like, for example, our first movement was, we got 3 holds yesterday in one day. So are you turning 70% of holds into paid gigs?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Ryan. First of all, congrats on getting 3 holds in one day. That's killer. And it's only going to increase from there, brother. So that's awesome, man. No, so here's the thing. A hold is a little weird because different people in the industry think about that differently. There are some bureaus, for example, that will say, hey, I got an opportunity to sell a speech to a client. They need a opening keynote in Vegas on October 3rd. They might call 30 speakers and ask them for their availability, put them all on hold, and the client's never even heard your name. And the client, let's say they sent you out to the client, and the first thing the client says is, no, I want a female speaker. Now, that was nothing you could have done differently. Technically, it was a hold on your calendar, but you didn't close the hold. So I'm not suggesting that you should close 70% of holds. I'm suggesting that if you are head-to-head with a direct competitor and the client is planning to hire someone at that fee in that range and that topic matter, that's where you're going to win 70%. So just to answer your question directly, Ryan, we only close about 12% of holds. So for us to close, 120 speeches a year, we need 1,000 holds. So clearly that's not 70%. But what we find is that not every hold is an actual at-bat or an actual opportunity. Someone might call up for a hold, they reach the client, and then the client says, yeah, we just decided not to do the event. So even though we technically had a hold, we didn't close it, but nor was it because we lost to a direct competitor. I'm just suggesting at your topic and your fee range, you should be winning 70% of the time vis-a-vis direct head-to-head competitors.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks.
Sure. Steve.
Yeah, Josh, I don't want to drag you too far away from your pricing discussion, but you started talking about holds. Is it common for a bureau to ask you to hold something and then never get back to you? Because I would say nearly 100% of the holds that didn't come true, I never heard back from them, and I had to go back to them. Is that pretty common, or is that because I'm a new guy, or what?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I could see you feeling like, gosh, maybe it's me or whatever. Bureaus almost always never follow up. I hate to say it, but that's just the problem. And they're not even bad people. I'm not criticizing bureau agents or anything, but they're busy running around. They even forgot that they held it on your calendar. They just put stuff out there in the ether, hope it closes. If it does, they'll call you back. And if not, they forgot about it. Like they already tuned it out. So it is not you. We get that all the time. If I were to look on my calendar right now, I bet I've got 5 holds from today, like that are still on my calendar as holds because no one ever released the hold. And clearly I'm not doing the deal today. So it happens all the time. Please don't take offense to that. It's absolutely not you. It's just the way the norms and the mores of our industry look.
Josh, I have a question for you. When you're talking about increasing your fee from 15 to 20 and then incrementally to 22.5, do you find that worked in the number of talks? Like from going from 1 talk a month to 2, technically you're doubling the number of talks. Any thoughts on how that grows incrementally, or does it automatically just suddenly hit a tipping point?
Well, so excellent question. I think that it depends on where someone is in their career. If you're doing like 1 or 2 talks a month, it's a little different than if you're saying like, oh, I'm doing 10 a month and now I want to go to 15 a month. You know, so because if you're doing a higher number already, that means that you're more established in the bureau community and that you've clearly got a market that for your message, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if you're only just doing 1 a month, you might still be figuring that out. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, what you want to do is, my recommendation is price at a point that is certainly setting you up as a professional. Like don't say, oh, I'll take a deal for $1,000, because then you don't look like your message is that valuable. But whatever that baseline is, $10 or $12 or $15,000, from there, hopefully you start to get real momentum before raising your fee. And there definitely is a barometer. Like when I went from 30 to 35, we did less speeches, fewer speeches. So in general, as you ratchet up, you might have a little bit of dip in volume, but hopefully the economics take care of themselves. But that's what I'd recommend. Don't like feel you need to be doing a certain number of volume to get to the next level. I just try to build as much volume as you can before increasing your fee.
Thanks.
Any other questions for the folks on the line? And by the way, it could be on pricing, it could be on keynote structure, it could be on the pillars concept, or it could be on anything up and down, anything related to your speaking business or speaking in general.
What's up, Josh? I've got a quick question for you. Ryan here.
Hey, Ryan.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, cool. So I had talked to somebody and I was explaining where my prices are at, and they were saying that, I've been holding off on any real bureau conversations or relationships. Following your advice, I'm just being super bureau ready. And I was explaining that, and she had said, well, there's this market for lower than what you're charging to sort of get in there and maybe get traction at that lower level. So, I'd like to get into the bureaus at the 10 spot, but she's saying, well, if you jump in there at a 5 or 75 and you still have that real value, then maybe you can start that relationship at a lower. So I'm curious your thoughts, because I'm really leaning towards your expertise on being bureau ready and coming at a certain level. What are your thoughts at starting the conversation saying, hey, I think I'm at a 10, I'm at a 10, and I'm willing to do it for a 5 or 7.5 just to get out there and get some traction? Curious your thoughts.
Excellent question. So first of all, we think about bureaus as like this single unit, but there are different types of bureaus. And different types of bureaus are going to be more willing and excited about different fee ranges. So my suggestion to you would be, if you said, hey, I'm willing to do something for $7,500, and you called up leading authorities or Washington Speakers Bureau, you might not want to do that yet, because you only get a chance to make a first impression once. They may discount your overall value, et cetera, and they're not that excited about doing a lower dollar speech. That being said, there are dozens of other bureaus that would be excited about it. Here's a good example that comes to mind: the folks at Speaker Exchange Agency in Overland Park, Kansas. Julie and Brittany are lovely, awesome, super professional, great people. They have excellent clients, but their average fee speaker is lower than, for example, Harry Walker or Washington Speakers Bureau. In other words, Julie and Brittany are not representing ex-presidents. They tend to operate in a little bit lower budget space. By the way, not right or wrong, it's not a judgment. They're both equally awesome and professional. But my suggestion to you would be, as you're getting started working with bureaus, maybe you start contacting some of those smaller bureaus who are, number one, more willing to give a new person a shot, and number two, a little more excited, because they might bump into a client tomorrow that says, oh, I love this topic, but I only have $7,500. My suggestion would be for you is tell them that your fee is what your fee is, and be consistent. So if your fee is 10, tell them your fee is 10. But just tell them, listen, in an effort to build our relationship, I have some flexibility. So if you feel like you've got a great opportunity at $7,500, let's discuss it. What that does is it helps you build a relationship. It still holds your value because your list price is still 10 in this example, but it's showing your willingness to be flexible and your desire to build a long-term relationship with that bureau. So there are a number of bureaus that will engage with sort of newer speakers or people that haven't done as much in the bureau community. I would start there, build bureau momentum. So then when you get to the next tier of bureaus, you can say to them, hey, I did 30 bureau gigs last year. And then once you finally get to like the Harry Walkers or Washington Speaker bureaus, you can say, hey, I've done 100 bureau dates over the last 3 years.
Got it. Bureau momentum. Bureaumentum is a whole new word. Bureaumentum. I like it. Thank you, Josh.
Bureaumentum. I love that. We will credit you for the term. What else is on your mind?
Josh, I've got one. Maybe it's just a little left of what you're discussing here, but you even kind of covered this a little bit in the boot camp thing, but it's been an issue. Is sort of the does anyone have questions thing? So right, you end the whole thing, wild applause, and then it's kind of this, they said so I'm trying to set that up differently within the presentation. So I'm almost like prepping that, at the end we're going to be discussing, not more questions, but sort of different things and prep. Do you have other strategies to make that less awkward? You have like this huge thing that ends with a bunch of applause and it's all great, and then somebody goes down a weird path with horrible questions that I love and I'm happy to respond to, but
Yes. Well, so there's a great question they have, and I actually do have a little technique. Feel free, by the way, for this and anything we share, feel free to borrow all of this. We just believe in abundance, and sharing our techniques doesn't make us less successful. We just hope it makes the world better. So take this and run with it. Here's my little trick. So first of all, I always ask the host, do you want me to do Q&A or not? And I explain, I'm happy to do either, whichever they feel a preference for, I'm happy to do. So show your willingness to be flexible. But if they say, I would love for you to take some questions at the end, you exactly identified, Mike, the risk, which is the risk is you end with a bang, then you say any questions, the energy fizzles out of the room, someone asks a dumb question or a long-winded question, and then all of a sudden the entire event ends with like a ... instead of an exclamation point.
Yeah.
Here's the way to solve it. Ask for questions at the end. And first of all, still end your speech strong. Like you end your speech with a bang, say thank you, roaring applause, then say, hey, I'd be delighted to answer some questions. Don't end on the questions. Even though like you're 50 minutes of 60 minutes so far, you might take questions, but you pull back the closing. In other words, you take ownership at the end. So you might say, okay, we have time for one more question. You get your question, you answer the question, and then say, okay, excellent questions. Listen, I know we've got a lot ahead of us, but I'd like to leave you with one final thought. And then you bring it home strong for the audience. So you want to make sure that you are controlling the final word. You're controlling that first word with your James Bond opening, and you want to make sure that the last thing you say before you leave the stage is your powerful ending, not some bad question from an audience member. So that's the trick. Just like you'd ordinarily do, say oh, we're done, here's your questions, but just hold a little story or a little oomph back. It could be 60 seconds. Last question is answered. Boom, you hit your 60 seconds strong. Everyone's like, oh man, Mike was the best speaker we've ever heard. You win, checkmate. End strong, make sure the whole session ends with an exclamation point by holding a little something back, and you take back the mic and end strong with that.
That's great, man. Abundance achieved, world's a better place. Thanks, Josh. Actually, I love it, man. That's a really good idea. Thank you.
Sure. Steve.
Hey, Josh, thanks so much. This question might be not applicable to anyone else, so if it is, we can take it offline. But I'm hoping that maybe a couple other people have experienced this. So I'm super grateful how you told us to be, make sure you're ready before you go to the agencies. And I'm pretty sure I went through your list and was in good shape. Now I have some agents, but most of the time it's complete radio silence. And good testimonials. I always report those testimonials to them. I think the pricing is definitely on the very low end of people that I'm competing with. Do you have any advice on how to somehow create more interest in them? Usually I email them, which may be a mistake. Maybe you're going to suggest that I always call them after 3 months or whatever. But the responses are all incredibly vanilla. We're still considering you, we're still pitching you. So I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that for those of us who haven't really broken through and are still trying to get out there.
Yeah, you're spot on. A couple thoughts for you, Steve. One is a bureau is a collection of agents. And so you want to think about a bureau not as Premier Speaker Bureau in Nashville, but as Brian Lord and Sean Hanks and Brandon Edmonston and Jordan Smallwood and Carl Ware. And each of those really is a relationship that you want to cultivate. I would rather you cultivate a close relationship with 3 people than 3 bureaus. I'd rather you cultivate a relationship with a small group of people where you go really deep and try to get yourself sort of like in their top 5. Every agent will tell you that they have like their go-to people, their top 5. And if an opportunity even remotely will resemble something that you could fit for, they're like Steve Smith, because they know that you're like their guy or you're their girl. And so one of the things that you want to try to do is figure out how to get in. I'd rather, again, you do it with fewer people. Don't, instead of the shotgun approach, take the rifle approach and go really deep with a couple people, really build a close relationship. So here's what I would say. First of all, getting listed is an important first step. Awesome. Nothing wrong with that. If you're on a bunch of bureau sites, awesome. But that's just planting the seed. Now you got to water it and fertilize it and nurture it. So how do you stay in touch? How do you stay top of mind? That's really where the magic is. My recommendation would be to do something that's valuable to them. So my communications, for example, I do a monthly newsletter, but it's like an unnewsletter. I call it the Bureau Beat, where I write a whole thing where it's adding value to the bureaus. How can they be more innovative as a bureau? What can they, so I'm sharing ideas and stuff that's going to help them instead of like, pick me, pick me. So I make it about them instead of me. So just like you were doing if you were cultivating a relationship with anybody, it's like, how can you add value to the relationship? How can you make it so their lives are better as a result of you? And so maybe, for example, you saw an article that you thought you knew that they love, or you share some common hobby and you build a relationship that way. But try to build a personal one-on-one relationship with an agent as opposed to a broad sweeping relationship with a bureau. A couple other things that you can do, and feel free to borrow all of these too. Number one is, let's say you get a gig. Let's say Brandon Edmondson at Premier books you for a gig. Bureaus are very rarely going to send Brandon to a gig in LA. I bet Brandon would love to go to LA. What if you said, Brandon, thank you so much for booking this gig. Since you haven't seen me speak live, how about this? Can I buy you a ticket and get you a hotel room? If you could ask the guys at Premier if I can borrow you for a day, I would love to. Come on at my expense. We'll hang out. You can see my speech. We'll get a chance to get to know each other a little bit better. Absolute no-brainer. That investment will pay back every time, every single time. Another thing that you can do is, again, pick a short list. Let's say you're working on 3 people, back to our buddy Brandon Edmondson. Let's say you get a gig outside of the bureau channel. You finish this direct engagement, and they probably loved you, but they're probably not going to book you next year. No offense to you. They just want variety. So what a wonderful thing to do to say, hey, let's say your meeting planner is named Julie. Julie, thank you so much for being able to speak to you. I know you found me directly. You read my book, or you saw me on Google. Would you be okay if I made an introduction to a trusted friend? Brandon Edmondson works at Premier Speakers Bureau. He's a wonderful guy. And in fact, one of the most high integrity, smart, just an incredibly wonderful person. I know how hard it was for you to find me. And next year, when you book speakers, I think you'd want him in your corner. Just so you know, it costs you $0. Like, there's no cost to you. He's going to be a great friend and advisor. My guess is 10 years from now, you're going to call me and thank me. Would it be okay if I made an introduction to Brandon Edmondson? Sure, Steve, no problem. That sounds great. Hey, Brandon, Steve Smith. I'm just calling because I just finished an engagement. It went great. Client loved it. Standing ovation. Anyway, I thought that you'd like to meet her. I asked if it would be okay, and she's excited to meet with you. Is it okay if I make an email introduction? What do you think just happened to that relationship? You think other speakers do that to Brandon Edmondson? What do you think is going to happen the next time he has an opportunity? For sure. For sure. So the way I would suggest that you do it is pick people instead of bureaus, and do everything you can to add value to them, to make them think of you as a source of their success. Maybe you have advice for them. Maybe you can send them something. But if they look at you as a resource, not just someone who's asking for stuff, you cultivate the relationship. And over time, those things just pay off. Cool. All right. So we are going to wrap things up here today. Just a couple of final closing thoughts. Notice the little trick, right? Ask the questions, closing thoughts. Okay. I don't have a big fancy story to tell you, but I just want to say a couple of things. One is, the more we learn about this industry, the more excited I get. There's so much opportunity. We've now calculated that it's a $4 billion industry. There's $4 billion of speeches bought and sold every year in North America alone. There's plenty for us all. The other thing that I see is that audiences are desperate for great ideas. Now, not old school cliche platitudes, but the insights and thinking that you have to share is desperately needed. So I think it's our responsibility to cultivate our brand and our positioning and our bureau relationships. The reason that you guys are on this call right now is because audiences want it. There's dollars to be achieved. There's wonderful intrinsic value for you to go out there and share your wisdom and make a difference in the world. We just got to connect the dots and make it happen. So on that note, I'm grateful for your continued support of Ring Circus. If you know others that you think we can be of service to, let them know. We're going to treat them with the same love and respect that we have with each of you. And again, together, let's continue to elevate our industry, and together, let's change the world. Thanks, everyone. Have a great Labor Day.